It began as just another graveyard shift, the kind where the silence of the desert pressed against the glass of the booth and every flicker of the studio lights felt a little too intentional. At 2:47 a.m., the phone line crackled alive, not with the usual prank calls or insomniacs seeking a song request, but with a voice that trembled as though it had been buried under the earth and dragged back up. "I'm not supposed to be alive," the man rasped, and instantly, the host's tired eyes locked on the board. Static surged like an ocean storm, swallowing half the words, leaving only fragments. Nevada, desert. They never left. The host glanced at the clock, at the red on-air sign, then at the producer asleep with headphones askew. Against every protocol drilled into him, screen your calls, keep the flow light, avoid dead air, he leaned forward, thumb hovering over the fader, and said, "Go on." The voice faltered, breaking like wet paper, then steadied with a desperation that prickled the skin. "If I tell you what I saw, they'll know I spoke." Each sentence came with a hitch, a cough, the unmistakable sound of someone looking over their shoulder. The host tried to keep his tone even, the kind of calm that masks a racing pulse. "Who will know? Who's they?" But before the caller could answer, a low hum crept through the monitors, a frequency he hadn't heard before, almost subsonic, like a jet idling beneath the earth. The lights flickered once, twice. He caught his own reflection in the studio glass, pale and uncertain, and realized his finger was still pressed to the line, keeping it alive. "You don't have much time," the caller whispered. "Don't hang up. Just listen." And so he did, heart hammering as the man spoke of a place where night never really ends, of lights buried in sand, of shadows that moved even when the wind was still. There was a pause, long, aching, as if the voice was deciding whether this stranger on the other side of the static was worth the risk, and then a faint scratching sound, coordinates barely audible, carved out of the hiss. 37.24. 115.81. The line erupted in a metallic screech, and just like that, it was dead. The host sat frozen, one hand gripping the pen he'd scrawled the numbers with, the other hovering over the console as the studio returned to its lifeless hum. His producer stirred, mumbled something about a bad connection, but the host didn't answer. He was still staring at the paper, the ink already smudging under his fingertips, and wondering, not for the first time tonight, what exactly had just slipped through his frequency, and if he had been meant to hear it at all. Would you have hung up? Or listened? The studio felt colder after the line went dead, as though something unseen had slipped in with that static and stayed behind, clinging to the corners where the fluorescent light didn't quite reach. The host stared at the numbers he'd written, jagged, uneven strokes pressed too hard into the notepad, as if his hand had known the urgency his mind had not yet caught up to. 37.24. 115.81. His producer finally stirred, rubbing sleep from his eyes, a lazy grin spreading across his face. "Another tinfoil hat special," he muttered, yawning as he stretched. "Probably some bored trucker messing with you. Nobody calls at this hour with coordinates unless they're fishing for attention." But the host didn't laugh. He couldn't shake the tremor in that caller's voice, the way the words had felt torn from his throat rather than spoken. He ran a hand over the console, trying to ground himself, and that's when the room shuddered, just a flicker at first, the overhead lights dimming for a breath, then a low hum rising from beneath the floor, subtle yet deep enough to rattle the water bottle beside the mic. "Power grid's been acting weird all week," the producer said dismissively, already reaching for his phone, but the host's gaze stayed fixed on the notepad. He traced the numbers again, this time slower, feeling their weight. Coordinates, yes, but to what? The Nevada desert stretched far and empty, but those numbers. They were too precise, too deliberate. He looked at the clock. 3:01 a.m. A dead hour, a liminal hour. The kind where signals bleed across channels and things unscheduled find a way in. The hum faded as abruptly as it came, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than noise. "Forget it," the producer chuckled, tossing a snack wrapper at the bin. "We'll get a real story tomorrow night. Maybe Bigfoot will call in too." The host managed a thin smile but didn't reply. He slipped the notepad into his jacket pocket, fingers brushing the paper as if to make sure it was real, and felt an odd pressure in his chest, like the moment just before a storm when the air goes still, waiting. Outside, the highway lights flickered once, twice. Somewhere beyond the desert line, something had stirred, and for reasons he couldn't yet name, he knew this was no ordinary prank. The night air carried that strange kind of emptiness only the desert knows, a hollowness that swallowed headlights whole and turned each mile into an echo. By the time the host left the radio station, the city lights were already a distant smear behind him, fading like the memory of a dream he hadn't wanted to wake from. The coordinates burned in his jacket pocket, the ink smudged but still legible, a quiet pulse against his side as he gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. At first, the drive felt ordinary. Long stretches of asphalt bordered by nothing but sagebrush and the cold breath of the high desert wind. But the further he went, the less ordinary the world became. The sky seemed too dark here, as if it had been scrubbed clean of stars, and the moon, thin and brittle, hung low, casting a kind of light that revealed shapes where there should have been none. He kept the radio on out of habit, low enough to catch the hum of the road, high enough to drown out the silence that pressed too close. A country song faded, replaced by static, then by something stranger, a whisper threaded through dead air, a voice that didn't belong to the station. It was faint, barely more than a breath. "Turn back." He turned the dial, checked the frequency. It was blank. He switched stations. Nothing but hiss. A mile later, the same voice came again, louder this time, carrying the same warning, the same drawling cadence as the caller from the night before. He leaned forward, scanning the road, his headlights cutting across an endless blacktop that shimmered like a blade in the distance. There were no other cars, no roadside lights, just the hum of his tires and the creeping sensation that the desert was watching. Every so often, he checked the rearview mirror, not because of traffic, but because he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was behind him. Once or twice, he thought he saw headlights far off, a pair of dim yellow eyes that flickered out the moment he blinked. The coordinates grew closer on the GPS, each mile marker another step away from the ordinary world. The engine's rhythm seemed to falter as he approached the final stretch, the dashboard lights dimming for a heartbeat, then surging back. A thin band of static crawled through the speakers again, this time layered with something wet, like a breath against glass. "You shouldn't be here." He exhaled sharply, realizing his knuckles were white on the wheel. For a moment, he considered turning around, heading back to the warm glow of the station, to coffee and fluorescent lights and the dull hum of scheduled music. But the memory of that trembling voice, its raw panic, its pleading, anchored him in place. The desert stretched ahead, unbroken, the coordinates a blinking dot on a blank map, promising nothing but questions. He drove on, unaware that the road behind him was already swallowing his tracks, that the night itself had begun to close around him like a hand. The GPS went blank a quarter mile before the coordinates. leaving him to follow the dirt path by instinct and the dim glow of his headlights. The desert had turned to a sheet of frost, the sand stiff and silvered beneath a sky that felt too low, too close, as if the stars themselves were leaning in to watch. He cut the engine, and silence swallowed everything. No wind, no distant hum of trucks on the highway, just the kind of quiet that presses into your ears until you can hear your own pulse. He stepped out, breath clouding in the frigid air, and immediately noticed the tire tracks. Wide, heavy, old enough to have gathered dust but clear enough to suggest someone had been here not long ago. They led in a wide arc and stopped abruptly, like a story missing its ending. A few paces further, boot prints appeared. Deep, deliberate, each one angled slightly as if the wearer had been turning in circles, searching. But there were no return prints. No sign of where they ended. The ground simply swallowed them, the way the desert often does when it wants to keep its secrets. The host knelt, fingers brushing the frozen sand, and felt something warm, unnaturally so. He pushed the grit aside and unearthed a metallic shard, no larger than a hand mirror, its edges scorched, its surface humming faintly with a vibration that prickled his fingertips. It was a fragment of a radio transmitter, or something made to look like one, its casing warped as though it had been burned from the inside out. He glanced around, scanning the horizon. The stars were sharp, unblinking, but the darkness between them seemed to shift, a low ripple against the stillness. That was when he heard it, a crunch, faint but deliberate, from somewhere beyond the beam of his flashlight. He straightened, heart leaping, and swept the light across the sand. Nothing. Only the tire marks, the lonely boot's path, the yawning desert stretching on forever. But then, just at the edge of the light's reach, something moved, quick, low, almost crawling, vanishing before he could focus. The air felt suddenly charged, the same low hum from the shard now bleeding into the ground beneath his feet. He turned, half expecting to see his car swallowed by shadow, but it was still there, engine off, windows glinting cold. The transmitter fragment pulsed once in his hand, a subtle throb like a heartbeat, before falling silent. He stood very still, every nerve straining toward that empty stretch where the movement had been, wondering if the desert was giving him a warning or an invitation. The desert's chill still clung to his clothes when he returned to town, a hollow dawn creeping over the skyline as though reluctant to claim the night. The station was locked, the streets nearly empty, and for a moment he wondered if sleep might wash the sand from his mind, if a few hours of forgetting could silence the coordinates that now felt etched into his bones. But when he reached his apartment, something waited, neatly tucked into the metal mouth of his mailbox. No note, no return address. A small, unmarked USB stick, its plastic case scuffed and faintly warm. He turned it over in his hand, pulse ticking louder with each step toward the door, and for the first time in years, he locked it behind him. The laptop hummed awake in the half-light of his kitchen. He plugged the drive in, the cursor spinning as if deciding whether to obey. One file appeared, 03-14-97.wave. The date stung his eyes, 26 years old, yet newly delivered. He clicked play. The speakers crackled with the same static that had haunted the line, and then the voice erupted, no longer trembling but screaming, raw and frantic. They're in the ground. Not the sky. The ground, they came from beneath. There was a clatter, the sound of metal striking rock, then a ragged breath, closer now, as if the speaker had turned toward the mic. They buried it. They told us it was nothing, a drill, a test. But it's still alive down there. The host froze. It was the same voice from 2 nights ago, the same pitch, the same drawl in the vowels. But this recording bore a timestamp from an era before his show even existed. He scrubbed forward. A muffled sob bled into the static. "They're watching me. If you hear this, don't dig where the light leaks. Don't go where the sand moves." A scraping sound followed, like boots on gravel, then a distant roar, low, unnatural, a vibration that made the host's cabinets rattle. The clip ended in a sharp cut, leaving only the hiss of the speakers and his own shallow breathing. He searched the name, the date, cross-checked with old police logs and archived station files. The caller, if the records were true, had died in a supposed accident on that exact night in 1997. A burned-out truck found on a back road with no driver, no remains, only scorched earth where the tires had been. The death was ruled unconfirmed disappearance, later archived as a cold case. The host leaned back, heart hammering, the early sunlight creeping in like a thief through the blinds. This wasn't just a warning, it was a message out of time, a thread pulled from a story that had been buried long before his voice ever filled the airwaves. And now someone or something had delivered it to his door. The morning had that strange hush that comes after sleepless nights, a gray stillness that makes even the birds hesitate. He stepped outside, USB still burning a weight in his pocket, and immediately felt it. The air was wrong, too dense, too expectant. There, parked across the street, sat a van. Black, windowless, its paint swallowing the weak daylight. The engine rumbled in a low idle, a steady, almost deliberate hum that felt less like a machine running and more like something waiting. He scanned the street. Empty. No joggers, no neighbors heading to work, not even the stray dog that usually prowled the alley. Only the van, its tinted windshield reflecting his own pale figure back at him. He waited for a sign of life, movement behind the glass, the shape of a driver leaning forward, but there was nothing. Just the steady exhaust coiling into the cold air. Heart ticking louder, he approached his car, keys clutched tight, and that's when he saw it, a note damp from the morning dew, pinned beneath his wiper blade. Not a folded letter, just a torn scrap, the edges ragged as if ripped in haste. On it, the same coordinates he'd already followed, circled in harsh red ink. And beneath them, carved so deep the paper nearly tore, "Leave." He glanced up, half expecting a window to crack open, a voice to shout from the van, but it remained still, an empty sentinel with its engine purring like a predator's breath. He thought of the USB, of the voice that shouldn't exist, of the heat in the desert soil and the thing that moved at the edge of his light. Whoever had left this warning knew where he lived, knew what he'd heard, and knew he hadn't turned away. For a moment, his instincts screamed to obey. Get in the car, drive to the next town, toss the notepad, the USB, everything into a ditch and forget it. But as he backed away, the van's engine cut, sudden, sharp, like a held breath finally released. Silence poured into the street. When he dared to look again, it was gone. No door slam, no tires on asphalt, just an empty curb and the torn paper still trembling in his hand. The desert greeted him like a held breath, cold and waiting. He arrived just past midnight, the same coordinates blinking faintly on his GPS as though they, too, were reluctant to lead him there again. This time, the road felt emptier, stripped of even its silence. The world seemed to hold back its sounds, as if something below was listening. The note with the carved warning lay folded in his glove box, and beside it, his camera, fully charged, lens cleaned, ready to capture proof that could no longer be dismissed as static or sleep-deprived imagination. When he stepped out, The air carried a dry, metallic scent, like copper wire left in the sun. The ground that had once been solid was now a wound, a jagged sinkhole yawning wide, its edges cracked like brittle glass. From deep within, a faint, pulsing glow rose and fell, breathing against the night. It wasn't steady light, it moved like it was alive, folding in on itself, retreating, returning, never quite revealing its source. He clipped the camera to his chest, flicked on the beam, and lowered himself carefully down the fractured slope. Sand crumbled under his boots, sliding into the dark below, and every step sounded wrong, too loud, as though the earth were hollow. The air grew warmer the deeper he went, the glow licking the rocks in dim strokes of amber and green. Halfway down, he saw the first wreck, the twisted remains of a truck, its frame scorched and bent at impossible angles. Tires melted into the earth like candle wax. Beside it, bones, animal or human, he couldn't tell, picked clean but blackened, as though fire had eaten them from within. He swallowed hard, the taste of metal rising in his throat. The camera's red light blinked steadily, recording everything, but when he spoke, just a whisper to mark the time, his voice came back wrong. Stretched, doubled, a second tone shadowing his words like an echo from somewhere behind him. Deeper still, more wreckage surfaced. Rusted vehicles, scraps of fabric, a dented helmet half buried in dust. And at the center, resting on a bed of scorched stone, was the source of the light, a smooth, humming object no larger than a chest, its surface a patchwork of mirror-like facets that shifted even when he stood still. The glow pulsed with his heartbeat, and for a moment, he swore it pulsed with his breath too. He raised the camera closer, but the lens trembled, distorting the frame. The audio meters spiked with a low-frequency hum that wasn't there before. He whispered again, testing, and heard his voice return a full second later. Distorted, deeper, layered with something that wasn't his voice at all. His hands itched to reach out, to touch it, to prove its weight, but the coordinates, the van, the note, they pressed against his mind like a held warning. Instead, he took another step, the glow swallowing his shadow whole, and realized with a tightening chest. The sinkhole wasn't just a grave for old wreckage. It was a mouth. And it was awake. The recorder was coated in dust, its metal warped from heat, but when his fingers brushed the side, the light on its panel flickered green, impossibly alive after decades underground. He glanced back toward the shaft of moonlight spilling from the sinkhole above. The surface was too far away now. Only the low hum of the buried object kept him company. He pressed play. A hiss of static. Then a voice, hoarse, terrified. The same voice that had called his radio show. "This is Sergeant Alan Reeves. If anyone finds this, I'm already gone. We dug too deep. It isn't from the sky, it was waiting. Buried. Breathing." His breath caught in his throat. Reeves had been dead for 28 years. The tape crackled on. They said it was a craft, but it wasn't metal. It shifted. It spoke, not with sound but with pressure. We sealed the shaft. God help us, we thought it was over. A clatter echoed somewhere deeper in the cavern. The host whipped his flashlight around. Dust rained from the ceiling, as if the tunnel itself were listening. The recorder squealed. The voice now trembled. "If you hear this, don't call them. Don't dig it up. They're already here." Static swallowed the rest, until a whisper cut through, soft as breath against his ear. His name. Spoken clearly. His knees buckled. The recorder dropped, clattering against bone and rust. The whisper came again, layered in the static. a slow repetition of his name, stretched, distorted, like something was testing its shape. The tape snapped off. The cavern was silent. But the light from the object ahead pulsed, once, twice. A rhythm, calling him forward, or warning him back. And behind him, from the tunnel leading out, came the sound of bootsteps, crunching sand, deliberate, drawing closer. The host didn't wait. The moment he got back to town, dust still clinging to his boots, he uploaded every second of the footage. The sinkhole, the bones, the strange, humming object that warped his voice on camera. His fingers trembled as the progress bar crawled from 37% to 100%. He didn't care about likes, shares, or ratings anymore. He just needed it out there, before someone decided it shouldn't be. For a brief, surreal window it worked. The video spread. His inbox flooded with messages, listeners, night shift workers, and insomniacs from across the country claiming they'd heard similar hums, seen the same flickers in the sand, and felt that low vibration under their skin. Then silence. It started with a single email notification. Content removed, violation of community standards. Minutes later, the same message hit his backup channel. Then his podcast feed. Then his personal account. By 4:17 a.m., the footage didn't exist anywhere online. Not even a shadow of the file remained on cloud storage. At 4:46 a.m., the front door of the radio station chimed. 2 men stood in the lobby. Suits too dark for dawn, smiles too polite for strangers. They didn't introduce themselves, just asked, with the kind of calm that felt like a warning, if he still had the original tape. Their eyes scanned the walls, the ceiling, the dusty corners of the studio like they already knew the answer. He lied. Said he lost it. Said it was all for show. They left without a word. By morning, the archives were gone. Every file, every saved segment, every midnight confession from the past decade, wiped. His login didn't even recognize his own name anymore. Sitting in the empty studio, the host stared at the blank monitor, the faint smell of burned dust lingering in the air. The low hum, the one he thought he'd left in the desert, seemed to echo through the walls again, just enough to raise the hairs on the back of his neck. Someone didn't want this story told. And now it wasn't his story alone anymore. Weeks drift by like smoke, leaving behind only rumors and half-forgotten headlines. The host's name becomes a whisper online, trending for a moment, then vanishing from search results as if scrubbed by an unseen hand. His chair at the radio station remains empty, the microphone cold. No goodbye note. No farewell message. Only absence. But the story doesn't end there. Listeners begin reporting something strange. At precisely 3:33 a.m., across multiple states, a dead AM channel flickers to life. No station ID. No advertisements. Just static. And then his voice. The same broadcast they tried to erase, his desperate recounting of the desert coordinates, the sinkhole, the light beneath the earth, playing in perfect clarity. Again and again. Some say the tape loops. Others claim new details appear each night, things he never said on air. The phenomenon spreads. Truckers on empty highways, insomniacs in dim kitchens, security guards in silent lobbies, they all hear it. A ghost broadcast, carrying a warning that no one fully understands. The FCC denies its existence. Official logs show nothing at that frequency. but independent radio enthusiasts track it, triangulate it, swear the signal moves, from desert to city, from ocean coast to mountain ridge, always just out of reach. And the host. Gone. No bank activity, no cell phone pings. His mailbox fills with dust. His neighbors report seeing a van, black, silent, parked for hours, then gone by dawn.